There's a question on problem 2A on worksheet 11. So we're going to construct a sine or cosine equation given this criteria. So I have two graphs on here because Mr. Ahrens and I tend to graph things looking a little different. Uh, I'll do my graph first, and then Mr. Ahrens' graph I'll do on the right. A minimum of y equals 5 at x equals 0. So 5 at x equals 0 is the minimum. So we know that that's like the lowest point that it's going to be. And then a maximum of 25 at x equals 32. So if I just figure that this is a sinusoidal graph because it's telling me in the directions that it's a sine or cosine graph, that means that it's going to have a periodic look to it. And it's going to look something like that. Now, if I notice that that length is 32, then I know in a sine or cosine graph, this is also going to be 32. So that means that that is 64, which would mean this is 16 and this is 48. Also, I know that if the minimum is 5 and the maximum is 25, that means that my midline is at 15. Real quick before we move on to writing the equation, if Mr. Ahrens is graphing this, he would probably put a 5 here, 15 here, 25 here, x is 0, 16, 32, 48, and 64. So if I look at these graphs, now my job is to construct a sine or cosine equation. It's probably easiest to construct a cosine equation because it looks like a cosine equation. It starts at the bottom, in the middle of a period, it goes to the top, and then it goes back to the bottom. So that's going to look like a negative cosine equation. So y equals negative some kind of number cosine. Now my amplitude is 10 because I'm going from 15 to 25. So that's negative 10 cosine. And then now my job is to figure out b. B is usually the hardest thing to figure out. So since from start to finish, a period is 64, and I know that 2 pi over b equals the period. What I can also do is I can use algebra to solve for b. So I would multiply both sides by b and divide both sides by the period. So I know that 2 pi divided by the period is equal to b. And since the period is 64, 2 pi divided by 64 is pi over 32. So b is going to be pi over 32. And I'll write that over here, pi over 32. Then there's no horizontal shift or phase shift because it's starting at x equals 0. So I can just put x, and then I add my vertical shift, which is 15. And then that's it.